Hey listener, Nolan here. Just to note that this episode contains brief mentions of sexual content. Maria Callas, widely regarded as one of the greatest opera singers to ever live, once said that an opera begins long before the curtain goes up and ends long after it has come down. Callas, like Silent Light, was born in New York City, about an hour's train ride north of National Sawdust. She made her career out of performing the greatest hits from the operatic canon on some of the greatest stages in the world, including the Metropolitan Opera. On an off day for the cast of Silent Light as they prepared for opening night, I took a backstage tour of the storied Met. I thought about the great artists of the genre that had graced its stage, Maria Callas included, and what they would think about what was happening across the East River in Williamsburg. If I had to guess, I would think that Maria Callas would look down her nose on what Paula, Royce, Thaddeus, Christopher, and the rest were doing with Silent Light. I wondered if she would get it. The music, the story, the culture, any of it. The more I became immersed in the production and the discomfort that I came to New York City to interrogate, I began to wonder if I got it. It's something I'm still wondering. I'm Nolan Kehler, and from Canadian Mennonites Menno Creative Residency, this is A Light on Silence, Performance Art and the Kerchiefed Faith. Episode 3, Peace is Stronger Than Love. In the days leading up to the opening night of Silent Light, I mostly sat up in National Sawdust's theater balcony, one row of loose chairs looking out over the theater space so as to stay out of the way of the crew at work, hanging lights and going through the special effects.
Thank you. And there's a hole in the middle of this light as well. That's better.
For all of the incredible talent and state-of-the-art equipment that make up Silent Light, it was gratifying to me to see that the normal hiccups and challenges of putting together a show happen just as often in New York as they might happen in Winnipeg. From a hose that suddenly flooded the drummer in the orchestra area to this moment while I was in conversation with Paula.
I was supposed to bring my Bible.
Oh, yeah.
Roz? I
It's okay.
forgot to do something. I forgot to bring my Bible.
Suffice it to say that Tech Week, ahead of opening night in the middle of the big city, was not a place to find peace. Despite these hiccups, though, the entire team behind the show, from cast to crew, was dedicated to creating the most authentic story possible. It's worth taking a second here to remember that the goal of Silent Light, the opera, was not to reproduce the most accurate depiction of Mennonite culture or life for the stage, or indeed a sung replica of the movie that it's based on. Remember what the show's stage director, Thaddeus Strasberger, said about that?
I don't think that this production is in any way a documentary. I think that there are lots of details that are not correct. You know, you're talking about the hair and the costumes and the way things look and the way they work and props, and there's so many things, but I really didn't want to make a documentary. I wanted to create something that was inspired by a situation, but then also to give a kind of liminal feeling that isn't so rooted in reality that it allows room for lots of metaphor and poetry as well.
Although National Sawdust did not exactly replicate the stylings of Silent Light, the film, there's no denying that when you looked out from those loose chairs onto that stage, that a traditional Mennonite house was there. The entire set was built out of plywood, with a plain barn dining table and chairs at the center of the stage. An old grandfather clock that could have been my grandfather's sits out on stage right. That's the audience's left. And on stage left, the audience's right, a fully functioning kitchen where at the beginning of the show, the women were making pancakes and bacon that you could actually smell from my seat up on the rafters. Perhaps the most impressive feature of the set, though, is the pool that was built into the back. Standing about 5 feet tall, it was only about 3 inches deep, and the child actors in the opera play in it as though they were splashing around in a local pond. Over top of that was an oversized shower head that mimicked rain. To watch the show take shape over the course of a week, the final week after months and years of preparation, was a study in tension. On the one hand, there was a sense of comfort in knowing that the team was creating something with their own artistic vision and goals, aiming to create something that could present the strict governance and moral code of the story with nuance and openness to an audience who could appreciate the story's universality. On the other hand, there was something eerie about watching the cast and crew don their costumes and step onto a set that resembled a kitchen that you could find in any house in Friedensruh, Kleefeld, Gnadental, or Rudnavida. They were stepping into, for all intents and purposes, my kitchen, my house, my universe. The realism of that setting fell partly on the shoulders of this person.
I'm Amanda Gladue. I live here in New York City, and I'm the costume designer on this production.
Amanda looks more the part of a fashion designer than a costumer. She's incredibly stylish, looking every bit the part of a trendy Brooklynite. She also was hard at work, even as I was trying my best to stay out of the way.
I am what we call teching down. I mean, kind of teching down. I'm like antiquing an already antique alligator clip because it's a little too gold. I want it to look like she's had it for longer. So I'm like painting black over it and kind of...
What was your first reaction when you were asked to costume a show about Mennonites?
I was really pumped.
Were you?
Yeah, because it's a really specific world. I mean, my favorite part about this job in general, about being a costume designer, is that I get to dive into worlds that aren't my own. And this is one of those worlds that I didn't really know anything about. So it was really fun to do so much research into not just Mennonites in general, but also Mennonites in Mexico, which I had no idea existed, and learning about the different the different people in not just Mexico, but like Central and South America, and what differentiates each of them and what makes them unique and what they wear and what they, everything about that. It's great.
And that wasn't even my biggest surprise.
To be honest, it's a culture that I feel like I could probably be into, like it's something that, I was raised Catholic and in a city and in a very different world, but like the peace around it and the self-sufficiency, and I think all the time, I'm like, wow, these people must feel really at peace with themselves. That's a total assumption, but just the fact that you like wake up in the morning and you're totally self-sufficient, it's like my whole day is planned. It's not around serving someone else. It's about like serving my family, and it's beautiful.
At peace with oneself and completely self-sufficient. Boy, must be nice. Before the show, Amanda did plenty of research on the different types of Mennonites and Anabaptists, the clothing that they wore, and how they wore it. I watched throughout the rehearsal process as she continued to work to make the costumes as authentic as possible, right down to the head coverings, or kerchiefs. As cool as Amanda's work was to bring a world to life, it was somewhat less flashy when you compare it to the work of the Foley artist.
So this is just rain on an umbrella, uncooked rice.
This is Nathan.
My name is Nathan Repaz. I am the Foley artist. I'm enacting sound designs by Skip Shirey, and I'm really happy to be a part of Silent Light.
Back over on stage right, that's audience left, there was a wide array of seemingly random-looking objects. A dish towel filled with cornstarch, a wooden tower with marbles, the kind of thing you'd find in the waiting room at the dentist office, a circle grinder and a crankshaft, and, perhaps most oddly, a collection of water pistols that you could find at the dollar store, and an empty mixing bowl.
Let me just fill my final squirt gun. I think we're good, right? Yeah. I do want to squirt one person, shoot somebody in the audience. Splash zone.
Pick your least favorite chorus member.
Yeah.
Foley art is the use of sound to bring a scene to life. That dish towel filled with cornstarch is meant to mimic footsteps in dry snow. The wooden tower with the marbles is meant to be milk. The circle grinder and crankshaft, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. But the water pistols and mixing bowl, well, that's cows getting milked. Made all the more wild when the women of the chorus all don cow heads and bent over pails. For all of its auditory excellence, Foley art is usually something you'd more associate with an old-time radio show than a live theater performance. Nathan, who's also a drummer, seems almost like another member performing in the orchestra, given that the audience can watch him play.
It's an intangible impact in some ways. I think the coolest aspect of it is to have an audience member realize that what they're hearing is happening in real time. So it definitely reinforces the action on stage, and there's a really compelling kind of psychological component to it when you're like, oh, that sound is kind of incongruously being made with a device that's not even remotely related to what the source of the sound would be in real life. So I just think it's it's part of the magic of theater or of performance to be like, oh, there's this sort of non-musical sonic element going on that is very unique and very sort of reinforcing of the action on stage.
In this sense, Nathan becomes so much more than just an orchestral provider of sound effects. Given his proximity to the stage, he's seen just as much as an actor in the drama, so much so that Amanda fitted him for a costume. And this makes Nathan even more aware of the importance of what he adds to the show.
I'm visible, right? So if I'm making faces or if my awareness of the audience's gaze lapses, like that can be distracting. So like I definitely have to be, I don't know about full-fledged actor because I'm not carrying very much dramatic weight, but like I have to hand the crankshaft to one of the actors, and at that point I'm like a mechanic in the shop, in the show, like in the world of the piece. So definitely like being aware of the audience's perception is super important, and like, yeah, I'm very visible. I have to just kind of be focused and be like a blank canvas, and also still kind of react to stuff as well. And one of the things they tell you in any like theatrical production is like there are always going to be eyes on you, so like just don't lose track of that and don't lose sight of that, the gaze, you know.
Foley, in addition to being fascinating to hear, and in this case to watch, is maybe the perfect foil for my feelings about Silent Light. It's just magical enough to make things feel separated from reality, as though this couldn't possibly be a commentary on my culture with something so outlandish involved. At the same time, watching and hearing the Foley at times can bring that discomfort into even sharper relief, as though your physical senses and your imagination are both overwhelmed by the anxiety of the music and the drama. One of the biggest ways to face that discomfort, as I continued my embedding with the production, was in speaking with the cast and crew about the research that they were doing and what their approach was to the subject matter and to setting up the context of Mennonite culture. Perhaps there's no one more responsible for the story than Silent Light's stars, the opera singers that are performing the words and that anxiety on the stage.
My name is Daniel Okulich, and I grew up in Calgary, and now I live all sorts of places, and I'm playing the role of Johan.
My name is Brittany Renee, and I am singing Esther, and I live here in New York City.
I'm Julia Mincer. I am originally from Philadelphia, but I now live in London, and I am singing the role of Marianne.
Like everyone else that I'd talked to, Dan, Brittany, and Julia all had done plenty of research before arriving at National Sawdust. They also all had some association with the idea of a faith-based life. Dan went to Catholic school as a kid growing up in Calgary, Brittany came from a family of devout Southern Baptists, and Julia talked a lot on the phone with a Mennonite friend of hers before stepping into the theater. But when it comes down to telling the story of Johann, Esther, and Marianne, the backgrounds of the characters seem to fade away.
Once you kind of have a basic sense of just the place that you're inhabiting, where this is taking place, and it became more about, well, who is the character? You know, within this community, what are some of the conventions? What are some of the history? But then it's still a human emotional journey. It's a love story within a religious community, but it's still, the love story transcends all of that in a way.
It occurred to me for the first time, watching the projections getting aligned on that plywood stage and seeing Dan walk stoically onto the set in a very similar way to what the movie version of Johann did, that these characters were perhaps going through the same thing on stage that I was feeling looking down on it in real life. They had to move past their immense conflicts with their faith and their feelings to maintain equilibrium in their community and in their lives as characters. It's a sentiment that the show sums up in one fell swoop. Indeed, in one line. Peace is stronger than love. It's the constant that allows silent light to churn away in its devastating fashion for the viewer. It keeps Johann and Esther together for the sake of the family and the community. It keeps Johann and Marianne together because they find that ultimate peace in each other. And in a weird way, it keeps Marianne and Esther together because to confront one another, the opposite of peace, is antithetical. It's against the rules. All of this is the air, fuel, and heat that brings together the fire that is Silent Light, the opera. Now, I'm not a gambling man, often, but I'm willing to put a good chunk of money on the idea that most Mennonites listening to this have had some experience with avoiding conflict within their community, even if that conflict might have been necessary, because actually getting into conflict is harder than maintaining a peace rooted in an unresolved truce. Mennonite history is filled with schisms over seemingly small differences in theology, and to this day, faith communities split rather than hold their tensions in an explorative coexistence. I also realize that that's a very reductive oversimplification. But this isn't a Mennonite history podcast. Suffice it to say that when it comes to capturing the essence of what it is to be Mennonite, the Ode to Anabaptism, perhaps this is the detail that Silent Light captures with the most honesty. Given the fact that she puts herself through heartbreak in every show, I asked Brittany what she would tell someone who was going through what Esther was going through in real life.
I feel like it's something, if someone was going through this situation, through this heartbreak, through infidelity, whatever it may be, I think it's something that it's kind of coming to terms with yourself a little bit and how much you can deal with. The heartbreak is a very powerful thing. It's a very, very powerful thing, and that's one thing I would never want to put that on anyone, to just suffer. And so it's something where I think at some point you have to come to terms with how much you are suffering. At some point, I feel like God would never want you to suffer to a certain extent.
The idea of caring for oneself also feels counter to the Mennonite ethic of serving the community around you. It would completely break the flux within which the entire story operates. It's something that Dan notices as well.
Well, I think the thing that I find most interesting about Johann and the community in general, there is a certain stoicism. It's about withholding and controlling the feelings as opposed to being a wildly expressive, Pentecostal sort of experience. That's the community that's the type of person that Johann is, and he's very stuck.
That same flux that is fueled by not upsetting the moral community's peace is also fed by not questioning God's will. But this begs the question, what is God's will in Silent Light? It seems to exist on two sides of the same coin. God's will fuels the sacramental marriage of Johann and Esther, sanctified by the community, but it also fuels Johann and Marianne's affair, which comes to a head during a rendezvous scene in the middle of the show. The pool that the children play in earlier on in the opera becomes the bed in which Johann and Marianne conjugate their love. The two lovers enter the pool shyly at first, two people facing down the vulnerabilities of any lovers. Slowly, they give way to their passions, and their tentative movements in the pool turn into gigantic splashes that cover the stage in water. Believe me when I say that it is a weird exercise to analyze a sex scene on stage for its religiously cultural overtones. At this point, in my exposure to the show, pardon the expression, I wondered how much I was projecting in my analysis. But when I watched Johan and Marianne in that pool, I was struck by one quality in particular that I hadn't seen so far: shame. This was the first time that the flux that the show is based on, Johan and Marianne's unconfronted relationship dynamic, had come unbalanced. First, the white-hot passion that consumes them in the water, and then the aftermath, confronting what they had done. Embodying that shame was something that was part of Julia's research when speaking with her Mennonite friend.
My sense of sexuality growing up, like atheist, urban, is so different from how he spoke about his upbringing and how he was taught about sexuality. And the way he explained how your presence in your body is different. Like, he told me about not being allowed to dance growing up, and how there's no prom because there's no music in the home, there's no dance, but your sense of your physicality is just so different. It had to really change how we thought about, or for me, how I thought about the sexual relationship between these two characters, which is very much, I think, at the center of this piece. Marianne has been drawn into this situation, this love affair, or this sexual affair that feels bigger and more powerful than anything she's ever known, that feels sacred, because it feels like something she can't objectively, intellectually grasp. And she gets swept up in that, and then ultimately she does the painful and what she feels is generous and ultimately the right act of ending it. Like, all that text is peace is stronger than love, like maintaining the community, maintaining our peace, maintaining peace for everyone, not ripping violently through the fabric of our whole social structure. That's stronger than the love that she feels for Johan. So she sacrifices that.
That idea of the affair being something that is born of something bigger, as if the transgression itself came from God, was something that Dan mused about too.
In some respects, Johan is a character he's paralyzed by his indecision. He's paralyzed by his desire and his need to do right, and his morality, which he is both betraying and also finding that perhaps maybe there's a greater morality. Maybe God does want him to be with this woman. And when everything is framed through trying to figure out what God wants of you, when something feels right and natural, who are you to question it? And yet, so these are the things he's wrestling with, but there's no mechanism in place in this community for him to have, free expression of it, except in a few conversations.
As I've continued to process my thoughts about Silent Light, it's become clear that I need to have a few conversations of my own. I need to air out my own discomforts, my own unease. And that's exactly what I plan to do in the next episode of A Light on Silence.